Okay. So, Wig, would you mind doing the honors of kicking off the meeting officially while I just make sure that all the YouTube and Zoom nuts and bolts are okay?
Yeah, sure. Do we have any guests, by the way? Are there other folks out there, Stefan?
There is no one who is watching on YouTube right now, but that's because I just started YouTube. And if anyone from the general public joins on Zoom, they'll show up here under attendees. So at the moment, no, it's just the four of us, I'm afraid to say. But still, that is four of us, and I think we're good to proceed.
That's fine. So I'm Wig Seymour. This is the monthly main meeting of the MBTA Rider Oversight Committee. And we've got four of us in attendance right now. I'm going to let the other members and then our guest, Brian Kane, introduce themselves. Len, do you want to?
Sure, I'm Leonard James. Yeah, you're a little hard to hear with me, so
I'll turn it up. Thank you. Sorry.
You know, so I'm Leonard Diggins, and co-chair of this Capital Investment and Finance Subcommittee. I use the T exclusively. I either use the T or I walk. I live in East Arlington.
And I'm Stefan Wunsch. I'm the co-chair of the Rider Oversight Committee, as well as the co-chair of the Subcommittee on Marketing, Operations, and Communications. I live in Lynn, and before the pandemic, I took the MBTA exclusively. After the pandemic, during the pandemic, I'm working from home, and unfortunately just driving maybe only about 3 times a month. So I'm almost not mobile out of the house anymore, but if we ever resume regular workplace operations, I'm going to go back to 100% MBTA like that. Welcome to Mr. Brian Kane, the Executive Director of the MBTA Advisory Board. Thank you very much for joining us, Brian. Do you want to lead off, Brian, with just any introduction of yourself, any what's new before we get into the topic that we would like to cover?
Sure. Thank you, Stefan and Wig and Len for the invitation.
Go right ahead. If you'd like to give us any kind of updates on what the latest and greatest, or we can just dive right into talking about the latest forum and the latest series of events that's been top of your list. Entirely up to you how you'd like to lead off.
Just let me just say thank you for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity and the invitation. The MBTA Advisory Board, for those that aren't aware, is the voice of cities and towns vis-a-vis the T. We have several statutory jobs that the T has to kind of come to us as begrudgingly as they do for things like review of their operating budget, their capital budget, major service changes, fare increases. And I have to continually remind them of this fact. Things like the Program for Mass Transportation, which is a big study that they're supposed to do every 5 years that they're delayed on. They have to include us, and they haven't done that yet. And I would hope that they would include the Rider Oversight Committee as well, because you guys are also an important voice of folks out there that use the system. So one of the things that the advisory board just hosted is what we call a major forum on the future of the MBTA. And I just put in the chat the links to the recording of that message, of that forum, excuse me. It actually took place a week ago today. And we've put the whole thing up there, as well as 3 individual panels. The panels were on oversight and management, as well as funding, and then finally kind of a discussion about what is the T of the future. Each panel was hosted by one of our members. We had the mayor of Medford, Brianna Lungo-Cohn, host our first panel on oversight and management. Heather Hamilton, who chairs the Brookline Select Board, hosted the funding panel. And Tom Koch, who is the mayor of Quincy, hosted our future panel. And the entire thing was kicked off by our member, Kim Driscoll, who is the mayor of Salem and is also running for lieutenant governor of the Commonwealth. And if the polls can be believed, is likely to be the next lieutenant governor of the Commonwealth in January. So we thought it was important to hear from her, and what the Healy Driscoll administration plans are vis-a-vis transportation. So we heard a lot from the mayor. She spoke more about sort of her role bringing more T service to Salem over the last few years, of the last decade, I'd say. Talked about sort of starting off as a planner, actually, for the city of Salem, and attending MBTA advisory board meetings 20 odd years ago, which was before my time. I should say that I started my career in transportation 15 years ago now at the advisory board as a budget and policy analyst. Then I was at the T itself for about 8 years working on budgets. I worked for several general managers because they change all the time. And I ended my time at the T working in operations, moving people on buses and trains every day. And I loved it, and it was great. And I would go back in a second. But I also have a family and kids that I like to see. And when I was at the T, I didn't get to see them. So more important right now for me to watch them grow up and have a family. So maybe someday I will end up back at the T. Who knows? That's in the future. And that's what this panel was all about. So we wanted to bring together some folks that have worked in senior leadership positions in the past at the authority, as well as some folks that are kind of writing about or current on what the T is sort of about today, and then some real thought leaders on kind of what its future holds, or at least what people hope its future holds. There are lots of challenges facing the authority, but there's also lots of opportunity. And maybe I'll just go through these one by one briefly, just to describe, and then give you my perspective on it. So the first panel was oversight and management. This was a discussion with actually each of these three gentlemen has chaired the T board of directors in the past. Two of them were secretaries of transportation, and one of them was also a general manager of the MBTA. And I forgot that Dan Grabowskis, who is a former TGM secretary of transportation, also used to be the Secretary of Consumer Affairs and oversaw the Department of Public Utilities. So Dan has a real wealth of history and knowledge in this space. And he was also the CEO of the Honolulu Transit Authority, HART. So it was Dan Grabowskis, former TGM, Joe Aiello, former chair of the Fiscal and Management Control Board, and Fred Salvucci, former longest serving Secretary of Transportation in Massachusetts history. And they really talked about organizational structures that worked well from their perspectives when they were sort of in charge of overseeing the T or running the T. They all agreed that a strong third-party voice, such as the MBTA Advisory Board, and I would add the Ridership Oversight Committee, is really important to running and having, I guess I would say, your facts checked by outside neutral parties from time to time. Having worked inside the T, I think this is true everywhere. There's a tendency to sort of tell your boss kind of what they want to hear from time to time. And I think the leadership tends to tell the board of directors what it thinks they want to hear from time to time. So it's important to have knowledgeable, independent third parties that can sort of not necessarily fact check them, but at least just give a different perspective. And I think each of these individuals agreed that that's very important. I think there is also consensus that the current sort of structure with the Department of Public Utilities isn't working. For those that aren't aware, the Department of Public Utilities, or DPU, is the state safety oversight entity for for all public transportation in Massachusetts, but especially the MBTA. It's been deputized as such by the Federal Transit Administration. And there's pretty much widespread belief, I think it's fair to say, that it's not functioning as envisioned. I would argue, and this was also said by some of the panelists, that the current financial oversight isn't working as envisioned. Since groups like ours have lost their sort of official, statutory voice on budgetary matters and policy matters, things have gotten a little, I would say, away perhaps from the core mission. And there was consensus by these three gentlemen that have all been there and done that voice does matter. So I took that as a positive. Fred Salvucci suggested that state safety oversight should be given to the MBTA advisory board, which was a surprise. I could tell you we are not staffed or resourced to do that. But I think the point there is not necessarily where that ends up, but the fact that it needs to be not only independent of the sitting gubernatorial administration, but perceived to be independent of the sitting gubernatorial administration. And so I think that's what that message was. And that actually got some good coverage in the press. And I think folks understand that that there will be change in this space. And there was some discussion of it today at a legislative committee hearing. It was nice to hear from these what I will refer to as elder statesmen who have done it before. Not that we are beholden to doing things the way we've always done them, but it is important to understand that there are other models out there, and that the T itself has been governed by other models, and that there are perhaps better ways to do this. And I think certainly this and sort of the organizational structure will be part of the solution. I hope it doesn't devolve completely into a discussion of management structure, because that's not actually solving the problem, but it is an important piece of it. So we then moved on to our second panel, which was. Oh, sure.
Can you hold up?
Of course.
I'm just wondering if we might have a little bit of discussion if people have questions at each third of this.
Yeah.
I thought the whole thing was terrific, but I was especially interested in the first panel and their description, in particular, of the main challenges within kind of the state's organization as it applied to them, and kind of who they had to have on board in order to operate effectively in their positions. I thought all three of them were terrific, but that to me was kind of a kernel from that first panel.
Well, thank you, Mike.
What others think, but.
So, I mean, just to expand on that, the takeaway that I kind of came with was, obviously the T is an inherently political animal, and that means it's something that people care deeply about and pay attention to. In the past, it has perhaps gone too far. The example that I think Joe Aiello used was, just because a state rep has an Uncle Lenny that needs a job doesn't mean because of politics the T needs to hire them. On the flip side, though, it does have to answer to its political masters. The question is what sort of gets in between those two things. In the past, a strong board of directors that was gubernatorially appointed, but with some municipal membership, that saw itself as responsible to each other, professionally and reputationally, was very important. Having the third party check of groups like ours is also very important, to call them kind of on their BS. And I think the pendulum, I think everyone agrees the pendulum has swung a little too far in concentrating it all in gubernatorial hands. Because as we've seen, the T and its leadership will do what they perceive to be best for the administration, which is not always what's best for the agency or the ridership.
Right. And I might have one other question.
Yeah.
And Len may have a pretty good answer to this. I don't know. I went to about 10 years of MPO meetings when I was really focused on the Green Line and whether
God love you.
Happen or not. And Len has really been the guy for T-Rock in the last decade, without question. Well, also in his other position. But when I was going, there wasn't actually much discussion of the T at the Boston MPO, even though theoretically it falls just as much under the regional transportation plan as the highway system does. And that was kind of odd, that there was so much discussion of large roads, local roads, some appropriate bike and ped, and then the T would come in at the very last minute and lay down its program just before the vote of the critical documents. I don't know if it's still that way, but that's certainly a lot of people who put in a lot of time on regional transportation. When I was going, they were not putting in a lot of time on transit.
Well, I mean, the MBTA does come in last when we're developing the LRTP. The deal is that the MPO just doesn't have a lot of money to spend. I mean, we supported the GLX, to the extent that we could, for 5 years or so, but you fund other projects, in various regions, and if a couple of them are big, there's not a whole lot left, and what has happened is, in particular this last time, when we got some funds, and we had more money than we knew what to do with, the MBTA was the place or the entity that had projects, that could use some funding, so we did fund them. There was some concern about the nature of that last minute process, but that was one of the ways that the T has gotten money. There is a modernization element to the tip, but it's not a whole lot of money. I think it's like $2 million, and those are really dedicated towards modernization of transit. I would think that probably the place where transit could get the most bang for its buck, out of the MPO, would be the RTAs.
And the other thing I would say, which is a little different, is that back then I was looking at the comparative transportation funding of the various states, and there's just huge differences. Some of the states have much higher fuel taxes and have had them for a long time, and that provides an awful lot more revenue per person and per unit of transportation than Massachusetts has. So that was a clear, and some of those revenues were kind of pushed into being by crises like bridge collapse crises, and Pennsylvania's all ridge and valleys, so they had an extraordinary cost compared to us or others. But we were really short compared to the leaders in the country on transportation funding, and I think that shows up in the transit as well as in the roadways.
Just because I don't know, could you give me a sense of scale, like in terms of the MBTA, I don't know, capital or operations? I'm not sure which one is more comparable compared to the MPO. What are we talking? Is it like 10 to 1 size or like 100 to 1?
So the MPO has about 100 million to spend a year, and so the T, I think, is trying to spend at least $1 billion a year.
It's $1.5 billion operating and about 2 a year in capital.
Capital, yeah. So yeah. So
Okay.
So it's
Huge
order-
orders of magnitude. I got it.
well, in order of magnitude.
yeah.
That's
But-
just
I guess
sorry. Yes, one order of magnitude. Thank you.
Wait, you're not wrong in the sense that the Boston MPO does not discuss the MBTA perhaps as much as it should. And I guess I would point out that there's lots of things the MPO should discuss more of that it doesn't. There is an ongoing process that Glenn is part of, that I'm part of, to develop more of an operations plan to kind of look at what our foundational documents and core mission is and try to get back to it, try to get back to making sure that safety is at the beginning and the middle and the end of everything we do, not just for all the agencies, but for all the projects, and really make those entities come together and try to have a unified transportation network and system for Eastern Massachusetts, at the very least.
Yeah.
We've gotten away from that. And, a lot of it's been captured by MassDOT. The creation of MassDOT in 2009, really took the legs out of the MPO, given the fact that they now control over half of the votes. And it's harder to get things done. It's harder for municipalities to bring good projects forward. And it's also, I would argue, a failure of our Chapter 90 system to not give adequate resources to cities and towns and sort of force them to kowtow to MassDOT for these little crumbs, and things like the Boston MPO. So the whole system is broken.
Yeah, let me just throw one other thing in. I'm wondering, and so this is just a question. I'm wondering if the momentum attached to climate and the realization that transportation just blows away buildings with regard to a climate issue of concern, because it's just got, it dominates the emissions. There's power and there's transportation, but power are the two biggies, but power is distributed. So it's really buildings and transportation, and there's no comparison. The amount of energy and the amount of emissions, not only local, regional was the focus, but that's largely under control because of the Clean Air Act. But the local emissions and the global climate emissions attached to transportation are staggering in every part of the US, including Massachusetts. And it seems that the pace of focus on climate is accelerating. And I think that could be an opportunity. I just lay that on the table, and then I'll kind of step back.
Yeah. But Rick, you have 351. Well, in our region, about 100 individual municipalities, and so they're independent, and you have to figure out how to get them to work together, and it's not simply their select boards. You'd have a decent chance with that, and if there's any councilors, but in the case of the towns, you got to pass stuff through town meeting, and it takes a while, and it would take a big entity, that's devoted solely towards coordinating amongst municipalities, to do something coordinated. I know I'm a little bit circular here, on a regional level. It could be done, but it takes a huge effort, and we're not even remotely close to even trying to do that effort.
Well, let me suggest an alternative. IECC, does everybody know that IECC?
No.
Okay, well, IECC is the International Energy Conservation Code.
Okay,
And,
now I do. Okay, that's fine.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, the words are descriptive, the letters are not.
Yeah.
The first time that came up in our region and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts the state did not pass it, did not adopt IECC. But the second time, and it was really, that effort was led by groups like MAPC. You know, in our region, we have that somewhat unique structure with regard to the relationship of the MPO and MAPC. But MAPC did a good job leading that, but it wasn't enough to get through the State House and adoption the first time. But the second time, and every 3 years when it's upgraded since then, Massachusetts has been one of only 4 states in the country to adopt it in full. It went from not getting any traction because it failed in the first vote to getting 100% traction every single 3 years when it's updated. And that's really what happened to, that's really the reason why the buildings have gotten sustainable so quickly in Massachusetts and some other similar states. Every single new building and every single substantial rehab has to meet 100% of IECC standards, updated every 3 years. Why couldn't something like that, which drives the climate response on the building side, also apply to the transportation side?
Well, my sense, Wig, is that we once the state adopted it, the state has control over what the municipalities do. You know, and so
yeah, it's legislative.
Right. I mean, and so that's how it happens. A lot of transportation projects, they have to go through the municipalities. So unless there is something that the state would tell the municipalities, you have to do this, it has to rely on the municipalities coordinating amongst themselves. And it can be done. It just takes a lot of effort. I think were someone or some group, hopefully legislative, come up with a vision and we'd be willing to take that vision and to the municipalities and say, we need you to buy in on this and we need you to coordinate amongst yourself. We will guide you, but you all need to coordinate your town meetings and whatnot so that we have all that we need in terms of access, like right-of-ways, funding for roads, whatever. And even if the state was going to give it to the municipalities, the municipalities still have to approve the way that's going to be funded. And like I said, it's a huge effort. It can be done. We just have to set out to do it, and right now, I don't think we've even set out to do it. And that could be a shortcoming on the part of people like me, but as I get a better sense of what could be done, I'm at least talking about doing it. And
yeah, so just a last sentence or two on that.
Yeah, I'm done.
What happened was all the building codes are enforced locally, and that was always the way it was. But the codes themselves have to be standardized beyond the municipality. And so what happened was the climate effort with regard to buildings just completely bypassed the municipalities. It went to a state vote and it was over, and the municipalities had to conform in their codes enforcement with the energy codes, with the International Energy Conservation Code. The same thing could be done by the planning agencies and the state legislature with regard to transportation. If they recognize that transportation is by far the biggest climate concern, the states could adopt, as part of IECC or something parallel to it, a transportation energy conservation code that would be dispositive.
Yeah, well, they could. If they got buy-in from the municipalities,
No, they don't need it.
Well, that's what but hold on, Swig. They do need it in order to empower the state to do that, because legislation has to be passed, to allow the state to do that. And they have to get the buy-in from the municipalities, for the legislators to feel comfortable voting that way. Because I'll tell you, let me just finish, Swig. Once you start talking about taking power away from the municipalities, The people in those municipalities are going to start talking to their legislators. And the legislators have to have the willpower to push through that and do it. That's why they don't just do it.
Yeah, and that's why the first effort at IECC failed in the legislature was probably local concerns. But from the second effort, and now we're probably on like the 6th or 7th 3-year period, that opposition just disappeared, and it's no longer a part of municipal discussion and power.
So I was just explaining why it doesn't just happen. I'm not saying don't make the effort. So please don't say that I'm going against what you say. I'm just explaining the major challenge in doing it. And suggesting maybe an alternative way to do it. But you can try both ways.
Let me see if I can just tell a quick story that I think explains this. So yeah, Wig, you're absolutely right. Transportation is the biggest emitter, and there's been lots of laws passed, but there's no enforcement. So about a month ago, I called every state agency that I could think of that has environment or energy in its name, and I talked to a bunch of people, and I said, "Hey, can someone tell me what legal requirements the T is under to help meet the state's climate goals? 2030, 35, 40, 45, 50. The answer was no. No one knew. They said, call CLF. So I talked to Stacy Rubin, and Stacy Rubin could tell me. But Stacy Rubin has zero enforcement power,
Right.
as much as we all love Stacy. So the issue is not what laws have been passed and what is great on paper. It's who's going to force them to do it. And without any oversight agencies, the answer is no one.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, and I, it is not a matter of forcing in the beginning. You have to convince enough people. Len's absolutely right about that. And that's what happened with IECC with regard to buildings.
Yep.
So and I'm not sure CLF, I've had a lot of interaction with CLF over the years, and certainly know Doug Foy reasonably well because he.
Yeah, it's not the issue of CLF. It's the issue
Right.
that the state agencies themselves don't know what laws have been passed that they're supposed to enforce.
Right.
So how does an agency like mine, or how does an organization like The Rock hold the T accountable to meeting legally required targets when no one knows what the targets are?
Yeah, and I guess what I'm saying is that that MAPC model where it was MAPC and others, but MAPC is like the Boston MPO, right? It's dominant in size relative to the other regions because of the population of the Boston area. But once MAPC took on leadership of IECC, the first time it failed, but the second time it succeeded, and there was no looking back. And there was no choice of compliance. Once it was adapted, it had to be complied with. And that would be true in transportation too. If you mandated a certain amount of electrification, no matter what kind of transportation.
But who mandates it, and how do you enforce it, is what I'm saying.
Well, I think it would be the same as the buildings. I think that you would simply not give any funds to any region that wasn't complying. That would be pretty powerful.
I think that would be great, but I'm telling you right now, there's no mechanism right now to do that.
Okay. Well, I don't want to take up more time. I just, we got a little brain trust here. I thought I would take advantage of it.
It'd be great, trust me. But the fact that no one at EEA knew what the T was supposed to do to meet legal requirements was shocking to me. Because how can anybody look at their CIP or their PMT and be like, no, you're not meeting your legal requirements? I mean, I don't disagree with you at all, Wake. Don't take that from this.
I'm good.
We need to kind of figure out the enforcement piece.
Yep. So Do you want to go through the rest of the terrific half-day you put together, or?
Sure, happy to. Unless, I don't know, Steph or Len, you
Well,
good
fine.
with that?
Please.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fine, yeah, fine with that, yeah.
All right,
Please,
cool.
yes.
Well, so we had a very interesting discussion on funding, the T, with led by Heather Hamilton, as I said. This web page is a little actually incorrect. So the panel consisted of Andy Bagley from Mass Taxpayers, Senator Crichton, who's shown there, and Tim Murray, who's shown there. And so Andy Bagley, who I'm sure everyone knows, kind of kicked off the presentation, or the panel, I should say, with a kind of a discussion of the budgetary crises facing the T. And, the deficits are massive, starting in 24, $200 to $250 million, depending on how ridership rebounds in the next 12 months. Put that up against a need to hire 2,000 people that's not budgeted for. And you have a massive deficit. And then couple that with 2025, when a lot of the state support for the T's capital programs kind of disappears, as projects like Greenlight Extension, South Coast Rail come online, and the funding for the new Red Orange Line cars from the state dries up. Theoretically, they're supposed to be built. We'll see. And you're kind of there. So Andy did a good job of sort of laying out what the gaps are. And then, Senator Crichton, who's the Senate Chair of Transportation, and Tim Murray, CEO of the Worcester Chamber of Commerce, former Lieutenant Governor, who we all know, and he talked about potential solutions. And, the kind of one of the big headlines was from Senator Crichton that, there will be a big sort of omnibus bill coming out of the next legislative session around the T, which hopefully can solve the funding issue. The big, I guess, complaint might be the wrong word, or annoyance, I guess, is a better word, that he brought up and that others brought up as well, is that the administration refuses to state what the funding needs are. So organizations like Mass Taxpayers, my organization, and lots of other organizations have been calling out massive budget deficits for years based on structural and cyclical deficits and the system that just doesn't work, a funding system that doesn't work. But, for some reason, the legislature wants to hear it from the administration. And the administration for the last 8 years has sort of refused to put a number on it. In fact, the current administration has said that they have plenty of money, which is funny in some ways. The only reason the T is going to have a balanced budget this year is because they have a massive deficit of jobs that they can't hire for. So if they actually filled all of the jobs that they currently have posted, they would be in a massive deficit, operating and probably capital as well. So it's not a system that is set up for success. So that was good news, I guess, from the senator, that we're going to get some legislation. Unfortunately, we've all been around this long enough to know that there's been lots of legislation filed. Hopefully the next one comes with some real sources. The Fair Share Amendment, ballot question 1, was discussed. Obviously, the advisory board as a government entity hasn't taken a position on that, but I think it was fair to say that there was some support from some of the members of that panel for that, because the money it would bring in. But yeah, the message here is that the gaps are big. There's really nothing in place to fill them in the next couple of years, and this casts a real shadow over everything the T is trying to do right now, including hire a bunch of people, because under, the way they do things, the first people hired will be the first people laid off. Bus network redesign, which is predicated on increased funding. The BND folks will tell you they have budget to do it, but they don't actually have that budget doesn't have a revenue source associated with it. So doesn't matter if it's in the budget. So yeah, this is a real concern. And this is something that the advisory board has been talking about for a long time, year over year. And debt was also discussed. Lieutenant Governor Murray talked about how the T was saddled with all kinds of debt when it was created, which is true. There wasn't a lot of discussion about what the Patrick Murray administration did about it, but there was a discussion about the fact that the debt was there. So,
Brian, did Andy Bagley say whether or not he personally or the Mass Taxpayers Foundation had a stance on question 1?
I think MTF is opposed to one, but I don't know that.
Okay, I'll look it up.
I believe they are opposed to something like that.
Okay,
but
that's
yeah,
fine.
you should check, please.
I will. Yep.
So yeah, funding is always the issue. Nobody really wanted to take a hard position on a revenue source, for the T, be it, sales tax, income tax, gas tax, user fees, whatever. There was some discussion about what other properties do, like, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority in New York having tolls coming into Manhattan, stuff like that. Someone brought up a congestion charge, but there wasn't really any consensus about what the source would be other than that there needs to be a source. So, watch this space, I guess.
Probably to be a case of everybody is equally unhappy in a best case scenario.
Yeah, I mean, there was some discussion about, something that I've felt pretty strongly about for the last several years, which is the T needs its own revenue source for its capital budget as well. If you look at its long-term program, they're looking to borrow $600 million a year, every year, forever, which means they're going to have to repay back $600 million a year, every year, forever, with interest. So we're taxing our kids and our grandkids basically to do this stuff, unless we can find some cash to bring into the system that will allow the T to have to borrow less by paying for certain projects without borrowing, or have enough cash that it can get better interest rates and pay less, or do stuff like that. There was also a discussion about important projects that we really can't wait on. That there's sort of a consensus that we need to do things like bring better service to Lynn, do the Red Blue Connector. Tim Murray talked about how transformational rail has been to Worcester. Hourly service was just reintroduced last week. So, I think everyone agrees how transformational this stuff can be and how much everybody wants it, but no one agrees on how to pay for it, let alone how to pay to operate it. So hopefully that will change.
Well, what are your thoughts? Maybe like a payroll tax with a means testing component.
I'm agnostic on the sources, Len. My attitude is, if we're going to ask the general court to take a hard vote, let's pick a number that is sufficient so that we can stop having this conversation.
Right. Yeah. And I'm thinking also, because you probably heard me talk about this a number of times, I really like the future transportation report. And I think if we can, develop these 5 centers, across the state, Springfield, Worcester, Boston, Lowell, Fall River, and really develop really good transit within them. But I would say actually put our emphasis on the distal ones first, because they're the least developed. and show me how you can really build a good transit system, and how that really invigorates those areas, and it will get them on board, with supporting transit, because the more we can pull in legislators from around across the state, the more likely we can get good support for the T. And I think maybe the way to fund it would be, with a hefty payroll tax, but to alleviate the aggressive nature of that, by doing a means testing component, so that's an idea,
No, there's a lot to be said for that. That's the MTA did that in New York a couple of years ago with a payroll tax increase in the counties that it operates in, and that brought in significant revenue. Again, for me, and the organization, I mean, you're a member of the organization, hasn't taken a position on this, so I don't have a position on this. But I do think it is fair to say that as long as it is large enough that we can get ourselves the system we want and stop having this conversation.
Right.
I've been talking about this for about 20 years at this point.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about it anymore. I just want to fix it.
I got it. Well, I think we lost Wig, so
That's all right.
Not intentional. So
Well, it's being recorded, so he can check it out later.
Yep. Exactly.
So let me talk about the future, which is kind of the bright spot. So it was a great panel. This one was moderated by our chairman, Tom Koch. And we wanted Mayor Koch to kind of lead this one because of the current 7 MBTA board members, he will be one of 2 that continue after January 6th or January 4th, whenever the new administration takes office. So he will be one of the people sort of guiding the future of the T, representing cities and towns. Also, there was Mayor Ballantyne from Somerville, who spoke of the transformation that the Green Line extension has already played, even though it's not fully open yet in her community. Chris Dempsey, former executive director of T for Mass, and a recent candidate for statewide office, was also there to talk about what he heard when he was out and about all around the state on this topic and about mobility in general. Professor Ted Landsmark from the Dukakis Center at Northeastern gave a really passionate argument about the need to place social justice and environmental economic justice at the heart of whatever the T is in the future. Professor Landsmark was the first African-American member of the T board of directors in the 80s. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen that famous picture of an African-American gentleman being stabbed with an American flag in Boston in the 70s during the busing crisis.
Yeah.
That was him. He's the guy who got stabbed. So he's been around for a while, working on stuff like this, and a really cool voice to add to this discussion, and certainly one that I hope we can hear more from. And then the final panelist was Yasha Franklin Hodge, who's the City of Boston's chief of streets, talking about kind of what Boston has done to kind of, make the T operate better within stuff that it controls. And, this really was optimistic, and I give it credit. The T, and I say this all the time, it can do amazing things, has done amazing things. I mean, this is the agency that 30 years ago extended the red line on 2 sides while simultaneously putting the orange line underground, extending commuter rail massively, building major bus facilities, and making the blue line operate. So it can do amazing things if properly resourced, properly managed, and properly overseen. But you need the combination there. So it was a real good panel discussion. I think people are bullish on what the T can do, and I am as well. there was a lot of talk about the need for the agency to reestablish trust amongst its ridership, amongst, I would say, people like us who love it and pay very close attention to it. There was definitely a sense that in order to get that trust back, real oversight is needed from independent parties. This was a theme that ran throughout the whole morning. Groups like the Rider Oversight Committee, the advisory board, being able to provide, neutral, independent analysis oversight, not because of a deep-seated distrust of the MBTA, but just because everybody needs to have someone looking over their shoulder from time to time. And I think the T has lost a lot of trust, especially of the riding public. I lose a little bit more faith and trust every time I'm stuck on a Green Line train trying to come home. It's just really frustrating when they say that there'll be a train every 5 minutes and it doesn't come for every 12 minutes. I mean, that's a big part of it. So the sense though was that it can be fixed. And in fairness, we have made good strides in the last 8 years. There has been a lot of money spent. I think the seeding has been put in place, potentially with the new red and orange line cars, if we can get the signal system we need. If we can get the blue line upgraded, especially north of airport with a modern signal system, possibly, electrify a couple of commuter rail lines, starting with Fairmont and starting, with kind of Chelsea on in, Revere on in, Lynn on in, with frequent service. There was some talk about getting the fare structure correct. It's $7 right now to go from Lynn to Boston one way, which is kind of crazy if you're a person, trying to do that twice, each way every day. So that how has to get kind of figured out. But the bottom line is that there is a sense that things can get better. It will take more time, unfortunately, but there is a definite sense that the system we need is not what we have, that it is holding our region, our economy, our ecology, and our way of life back instead of being a facilitator of those things, and that we can do better, and we kind of have to. So I left feeling pretty optimistic, believe it or not.
Let me ask you a question, Brian.
Sure.
So look, one of the problems I see, especially on the operations side, is that for a long time we weren't hiring people. We're trying to keep the head count down. Yep. And there are lots of us saying that's a problem, but the problem isn't evident until it's really bad, and then it'll take forever to solve it because you have to then hire the people, get them trained and whatnot. On the safety side stuff, we're looking at processes, that weren't really working, like communication processes that weren't working. And I wonder, even if the T had enough people, had enough money, and had enough people, do you think we would have had the communications issues that we currently have that are leading to the problems that we have with safety? Is it a cultural thing, or is it simply a money thing? I know you're gonna say both, but which is it more of?
It's a cultural thing, but the cultural thing is precipitated and reinforced by the money thing, because for the last 20 years, say at least 15 years, the mantra has been cut expenses, and as expenses get cut back, shortcuts get taken, and that leads to a culture of cover your ass, CYA. Because everyone knows that they're looking to get rid of people.
Right.
And so then the culture becomes one of, well, don't do anything that could potentially put you in a proverbial line of fire. Right. Don't put your head above the proverbial parapet because they're looking to get rid of people.
Right.
Instead of a culture of, safety, instead of a culture of if you see something, say something, regardless of who says it, you know. And that's really where the culture and the dollars come together. And I guess I would also add that, we shouldn't forget that the T in 2015 was given a mandate by the legislature and the administration to increase own source revenue and reduce expenditure. And they went out and they did that. But I was inside at the time. There was lots of people leaving, and there was no backfilling, and there were whole departments eliminated.
Yep.
But they were fulfilling what they believed to be their mandate from their political masters. So
Yep. No, I saw it. I saw it and hated it. There's nothing we could say to do it. And at that point, we were losing support. On the Rock. And so you really even not having a real voice to say anything. I certainly hear about and another thing too, and I think is partly that we need to the T needs to get our trust back. But also I think that the public and the politicians, us, we need to be able be someone that the T can trust too. Because I often say that the T often behaves like an abused partner. And I'll be a little more graphic, like an abused child. And it's just scared, all the time, because the press picks on it. It's like the easy, whipping entity. And gosh, if you pay someone a 6-figure salary, and it's like that you've done something really horrible. But these days, that's not. It sounds ridiculous, I know, to some people, especially those who make a small amount of money. But that's not a whole lot of money if you want to live in this area and you want to have a family and you want to, especially when there are other things you can do. And so I really feel that it's incumbent upon people like me on the municipal level, but also our state legislators, to just absorb the heat, from the public, when the T tries to do the right thing, and not be a source, of that heat. We can be a source of light, but not a source of heat.
Well said. Then. Wow. Yeah. Well said.
Here.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in on you, Brian, but I've got to ask really quick. You mentioned, the relative successes of the late 70s, pretty much most of the 80s, if I recall. Did our elder statesmen as such, like Fred Salvucci and Professor Landsmark, talk about anything that is applicable today that was working well back then? Or is it just apples and oranges between the two eras, and it's just so many things are different that we really can't learn from that?
I think it starts at the top, and I think what I heard from sort of the elder statesmen was, at the time you had a governor in Mike Dukakis who deeply cared about this and saw this as a way to help turn around what at the time was a very depressed and depressing city and a depressed region. He saw this and the T as part of the solution, not part of the problem. And it starts at the top. There was an interval there of 4 years where things were not great, from 82 to 78 to 82. Secretaries of Transportation went to jail. But, a cabinet secretary was walked out in handcuffs. That's a great story. I got to tell you that one sometime over a cold one.
I'll buy you that round.
It involves Jim O'Leary too.
Oh my God.
But it starts at the top, and you have to have, you also, to Len's point, you have to, the T is going to have some political space to have some bad years. It's gonna have bad years. It's a battleship. It's an aircraft carrier. It can't be turned around on a dime. It's gonna take a long time. It's gonna take years. It's gonna take a lot of money. We're looking at, I wouldn't be surprised if we have monthly shutdowns of major segments of the system every year for the next 10 years. And there has to be a narrative at the top where that's okay, because we have to dig ourselves out of this hole. And it starts with leadership. And so we need an administration that is, going to provide that cover and that support. We need a legislature that will properly fund it and also cheerlead for it, and also leave it alone from nieces and nephews and constituents who need jobs, that they can't do anything else. So it needs to kind of be left alone. And, you look at entities like Massport, which runs a pretty good airport. There are other state agencies out there, the Mass School Building Authority. They do a good job, and they're invisible, and they're kind of left alone. They have enough political clout and support from on high that they can't be easily bullied or forced to do things like hire nieces and nephews. And I think that's the space that was created sort of in the heyday, and that's a space that can be created again. And I'll kind of leave you with this. The T of that time was the place where lots and lots of transit leaders get started. Guys like Gunn and all kinds of leaders that have gone around the world, former heads of London, former heads of Canadian systems. The current head of WMATA in DC is a former T guy, Randy Clark. And he just brought in another former T guy who was in Toronto. So, I mean, there's good people that come out of this system. People just like us need to be better cheerleaders, and management needs to be able to help elevate those people to give them the space to learn their craft and learn how to do this, because it can get better, and it has been better, and I really believe we can get there again.
Yeah, and better, and beyond what we were. And so
Here.
I agree. So we'll figure out how to do this, and we'll figure out who to talk with, and maybe we can have Sal Calvucci has been to talk with us, and seemed like he was amenable to meeting with us again, and maybe we can have a conversation with Grabowskis, because we dealt with him, and he can maybe help us work with the team
Dan's
better.
good. Joe Aiello's around.
Dan in particular. Yeah, Dan was very supportive of us. I think. Was it Mike Mulhern preceded Dan Grabowskis, right? Was it Mulhern then Grabowskis?
There was somebody in between.
There was
Okay.
some,
Just trying to remember, because it was under Mike Mulhern that the ROC was formed,
right.
and even from Mulhern to, I think you're right, next person to Grabowskis. Yeah, even a couple of GMs later, there was still that deep support for the ROC.
Right.
Anyway, I just wanted to agree, saying yes, Dan was very supportive of us.
Well, thanks for your time, Brian. This was I know how busy you are, and so this is a huge chunk of time, but thanks for debriefing on that and giving your insights. It's given us some ideas what to do. And I'll be in touch, with you and or Amira, right? I keep screwing up her name. Amira, okay. And also the advisory council, on a joint membership, building. Because I think if nothing else, it'd be good for the advisory council to join forces with you, because it's region wide also.
I agree. I agree. So let me know how I can be helpful, and keep doing what you're doing, folks. Thank you for what you're doing.
Ryan.
And likewise, let us know how we can be helpful. We're all in this boat together. We're all in this train together.
We are all on
this ride. The ride.
Yeah, thank you, Brian.
I'm sorry. You were right. It went from Prince to Mulhern to Grabowskis. So
okay.
I have on my website, I have a spreadsheet of all the secretaries and GMs. So
nice.
It was So
is that publicly available by chance?
If you go to the website, go to let me see. You go to for members.
Yep.
Click on agendas, minutes, and reports.
Yep.
And if you scroll down, maps and other documents,
I love it.
the very last link there. So
Oh.
this is
Oh, that's great.
starting when the T was created in 1964 up until today. So
Oh, that's phenomenal.
Now, if you really want to blow us away, you'll find out what happened to the T library, the transportation library.
oh, I know exactly what happened at the T library.
What happened to the transportation library? What happened? well, maybe you can tell us later.
Yeah, that's another one for a cold one.
Okay,
we're not
all
being
right.
we're not being recorded.
All right.
Roger that. I understand.
All right. All right. All right.
Thanks, guys.
Good.
All right.
Yes, thank you. I am much more encouraged than I was just an hour and a half ago. Thank you.
That's great. That's great. Have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Wow,
Well, that was good. You know,
that was excellent. Yeah.
well, I mean, you hate it when, well, not hate it. I mean, you kind of wish that other people would show up. I mean, partly because you want the guests to kind of feel that, I mean, it's worth their while. But I think our interactions with them make it worth their while. And even though it's small, I mean, there's a really hefty exchange of information. I mean, and so it becomes more of a two-way exchange. And so I think Brian got some things out of it. And I certainly did, you know. So.
Oh, me too.
So
It was huge.
yeah.
Yes.
So I'm done. So
Yeah, you said that you were very tired earlier, and I want to respect that.
yeah. Well, there's nothing for us. I mean, we would just be talking to record some stuff for people who might watch it later on.
Yep. And I'm certainly happy to cover the subcommittee reports and new business, old business, external meetings. I mean, we actually went longer than anticipated with Brian by
Right.
what, almost 45 minutes.
Right.
I don't think I have anything notable to add about the FTA SMI, the safety management.
No.
Inspection. Yeah, I don't have
Safety
anything to add
management.
today.
Safety management inspection. Yeah. You know. So yeah. Yeah. I don't have anything meaningful to add either. You know, at this point, meaning that if I delved into my memory, you know, or went to it, I mean, there's certainly some things that I read that were compelling. I mean, it's more about me really trying to understand how it is we have inadequate communication systems, you know, and I mean, part of it's technology, you know, and I think Brian did maybe give a good understand how it happened. I mean, if you are cutting corners, I mean, because of budget limitations, I mean, then it does create that culture. And but I guess my question though is that once you have the culture, how easy is it to change it? You know, and so then is it enough to bring in more people on the lower levels without changing the people at the higher levels? You know, I'm not talking the very top, but at the middle management level. But it's just going to take a while to get out of this because we got to bring the people in, we got to train them, and then they got to learn because it's more than just training; it's then learning, and then we have to learn from this, so that we don't repeat it. And certainly not put ourselves in a situation where we're losing everyone at once again, even if they do stay to full term. So I'll just toss for people who may watch this later on. The big thing, that's on my focus now, is the means testing. We talked about that in CIF, and I think that has some interesting possibilities, especially if we get this fair share amendment passed. I'm in the process of writing a letter to the editor with Sean Garbely, and I'll say that one of the things we can do with the fair share is use it to fund means testing. And if the fair share funding can pick that up, then the T doesn't have to spend that 40, 32, 41 million on it, and it can devote those monies to more operations things, so
exactly.
Yeah, so just trying to provide people with an example of like what it can do. Because to a large extent, Sean and I will be preaching to the choir, but we just need to make people really excited about it and talking about ideas. And I think I ended it with like, if you have any ideas, by all means, let us know. Like, think about things that we can do with additional money for
And
transit.
that's means testing for fares. And I also would have to say, for the record, what Brian was talking about, I don't think he had a position, but he just mentioned that means testing on a additional payroll tax to fund transit in the core region. I think that's got the best shot. I mean, I'm not very versed fiscally as much as you are, as much as Wig is,
Right.
but certainly the gas tax looks like it's just not going to fly for another generation. But yeah, but I mean, and anything to do with real estate or other, sales tax, etc. I think those are also non-starters when it comes to additional transit funding. But yeah, payroll tax with means testing, to me, that seems like the most reasonable.
Well, you see, though, what I was getting at though was payroll tax. I mean, I don't know if we have the ability to do a progressive payroll tax. I just don't know, because I think I guess it would be a percentage of your payroll, and so, but I think it'd have to be the same percentage for everyone. And so then the regressive nature of it is that even if the percentage is the same, it's going to hurt people with lower incomes because they need every penny, much more so than the people at higher incomes. So the way you kind of make it less regressive is that you say, but for your fares, for your access to the T, that's means tested.
Oh, without doing means testing for the applicability of the payroll tax?
Right. Because I don't think you can. I don't think you can, because I think to deal with the taxes in the state is that you can't discriminate with the tax rate. And so that's why our taxes tend to be regressive. And that's why the fair share thing is an amendment, because it's saying you're going to tax people at a higher income, like the billion at a certain threshold and additional amount of money, but I think this is like a one-off, and that money's going to go to transportation and education. But if we were to do a payroll tax, I think that has to be the same rate for everyone. And that becomes the aggressive nature of it, because as I said, the people with lower income need the money much more so than people with higher income.
Yeah, clearly. But then so the means testing is on fares instead.
Right.
Okay, I can see that.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen it that way, but that's a very good point.
Yeah. So that.
Interesting. Yeah.
So
it's funny because I was looking at payroll as being something doable, because that could be based on region, because payroll is tied to employer, which employers have specific locations, so employers within the MBTA service region is something that can be well defined. Gas tax, trying to establish a gas tax increase on a regional basis, that would be ridiculous.
Yeah, but even so, even if you do regional payroll taxes, all the employees at a given company are going to have the same payroll tax, right? The same rate, payroll taxation. That's how I understand the way taxes work. So given that you have different levels of income within an organization, those with the lower income, especially if they are below the threshold of really the threshold that allows you to thrive, and then they're going to be hurt disproportionately by
that's why I thought that payroll tax with means testing for the applicability of that payroll tax would be reasonably fair. But if you're saying that the payroll tax has to be uniform, then that's that doesn't make sense.
I think it has to be, but the person that would know more so than we would be our reps, your state senator, and Rep. Garberly. So hopefully Rep. Garberly will be at our November meeting. We can talk.
Yep. And I just, for what it's worth, I just exchanged emails with Sean Reed about well, I can tell you actually right now, because he just replied back later today, and basically just said, yeah, he's going to talk to his team about some dates for next calendar year to have Brendan join us. well, not to have Brendan join us, but for an opportunity for us to speak with Brendan. I know, very, very politic of me.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I'm just falling off the cliff here.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
No, we just passed 6:30.
Yeah.
There has been nobody watching YouTube live, and no other attendees besides you and me. So I think for the ridiculousness of it, I'll make a motion to adjourn for this evening. Would you care to second it?
Yes, and I'll just say 100 years from now, this YouTube video will have thousands of hits, and it will change the course of the MBTA.
Tens of thousands.
Tens of thousands, bordering on millions.
People will look
All
back at this committee meeting as the beginning of the new MBTA.
It was just 3. All right, take care.
Thank you, Len. I
Good
hope you get some rest and feel better. Thank you.
Oh, I will. I'll sleep very well at night. So take care. Good night.